You are Locked On Wildcats, your daily podcast on the Arizona Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for listening to the Locked On Wildcats podcast. I am your host, Mike Luke. This is John Schuster right here. Okay, we're going to continue the talk that we had about Arizona baseball. Do you remember where we left off?
It had something. I know we were talking about fandom a little bit. We got into the vitriolic nature, where Arizona baseball was, and how Tucson was a baseball city that provided a disproportionate amount of talent.
Yes.
Based on the population that it had, and there was obviously weather had a lot to do with that. But during that period of time, Tucson gravitated toward being a baseball city,
right?
And cranked out an impressive amount of talent during a 3 or 4 decade span,
right?
That has since dissipated quite a bit, but which is interesting in and of itself, because you'd think as population continues, that would increase as well. But and that helped Arizona be good. And up in Phoenix, it was the same thing. And again, this is weather based. You have much of the country is in 45-degree weather 6 months out of the year.
That's why a lot of hockey players don't come out of Tucson.
That's it. Although curiously, Scottsdale has a really good hockey program, has a really good hockey foundation. It's very interesting.
How many indoor hockey rinks are there in Scottsdale?
Don't know, but it's a significant amount.
I'm going to ask that.
And there's a lot of good talent that has come out of there. Hockey is also a very expensive sport to get into,
right.
So there's that has a lot to do with it as well. If you have a little bit of discretionary income, as Scottsdale has, then you can navigate some of that. But Phoenix is also a good baseball city, and Tucson was a good baseball city, and it helped with the dynamic. You also had fan bases again, and this is, if you weren't around to see it, it's hard to explain. But the level of discontent is a really tame word here, was pretty notable.
Okay.
And it was fun.
Right.
It was notable and it was fun. And there are other examples, between ASU and Arizona, over time. One of the weird examples, and then you can backtrack here to baseball or wherever avenue you want to go to. One of the fascinating kind of undercurrent rivalries between the two schools, where the fan bases were just unpleasant to each other. Nowadays, it would be considered problematic.
Right.
At the time, it was just,
it was just whatever.
It was just the 80s.
Right.
It was the 80s. It was the 70s, the 80s, and 90s, and this is just what happened.
Right.
Any of this could boil up in the Ice Cats.
Interesting.
The Ice Cats and the Ice Devils. There was a point in time in the early 90s up until about the mid to late 90s where the Ice Cats, who were a club sport at the University of Arizona, and there's some
led by Coach Leo Golombieski,
who I still maintain is the most interesting, for better or for worse, most interesting sports personality in the modern history of this university.
Just go.
How so? Because there was a lot of polarization going on, a lot of temperament going on, a lot of storytelling going. He was just a very interesting character, but he created a cult following,
right,
where the Ice Cats would draw at the TCC, which seated about 7,000 people, 5,000 people again. If ASU came to town, you could not get a ticket.
Right.
I'm not joking about that. You could not get a ticket to a club hockey game between two club hockey teams.
Wow.
And those games with those fan bases, in Tucson, it was, significantly tiered to, it'd be 97% Arizona fans. ASU didn't draw as much, but then you'd have some games up at ASU in smaller venues where a lot of Ice Cat fans would go.
Right.
And then there would be some interesting things that happened on the ice and off the ice. That was a very intense rivalry also. So there are,
and was he the colorful character that was able to kind of play into it?
I don't know that he wanted to play into it, but he didn't
all the
shy
time
away
at
from
Desert Sports and Fitness, by the way.
That doesn't surprise me. It's hard to.
Is he a man of the people?
I don't even.
I'm asking
just so interesting.
I'm asking for specificity on something.
He has one of the largest collections of Lincoln memorabilia possibly in the country, as Abraham Lincoln memorabilia.
Wow.
But there's very much a groupie mentality.
Right.
There's very much a this is who I know sort of thing that galvanized his conversations all the time. You could not get into a 2-minute conversation with Leo Golombieski. Your conversations with Golombieski were 2 hours, and they veered on a variety of different tangents. He's one of those guys who thought that he talked in a way that he believed the rest of the world knew about the circle that he was talking about. So he'd talk about some player, Bill, and I know the hockey joke.
I'll tell you what. Let's take a quick break, real quick. All right, but first I want to tell you about Built Bar, Ice Cats hockey. Here's the thing, and I put this out on Twitter. NBA fights very cringeworthy, or fights. Hockey fights, not cringeworthy. Real fights right there. If you were to look at one of the groups of people that probably consumes Built Bar, it's probably the hockey players right there. That's a shout out to the men on the ice. We'll be right back. All right, thanks for keeping it locked on, Wildcats.
Let's do a shout out to the men on the ice.
Is the men on the ice a term?
Sure. Now it is. Hashtag men on the ice.
Hashtag.
Hey, it's the NHL playoffs.
Yes.
Wait.
Dallas
leads.
By the way,
what the hell just happened?
Right when John Schuster was saying this game is going to be just
That's
Dallas.
exactly what I said.
Look at 13-0 run in the last 2:38.
What the crap, man! We go on the air with the Locked On Wildcat podcast, and Dallas goes on a run that they haven't gone in this.
And then Chris Paul heard us talking about it, and he decided to.
That makes sense.
Okay, go ahead.
That's the wonderment of liveness when you listen to it later.
Coming to you live later.
The second craziest activity I saw, the second most cringeworthy thing I saw live from a sports standpoint happened at an Ice Cats and ASU hockey game, where an ASU, trying to remember which direction this was now, because it's been 25 years. There was a knockdown, drag out on the ice, uncontrollable fight that was to the point where one of the hockey players was grabbing the other hockey player and slamming his face into the ice, nose first. It was
that bad?
It was bad.
Right.
It went on for a significant amount of time before they could get it cleared up.
Right.
It was just, it was close to sports carnage on the ice. It was one of those things where had there been video nowadays, absolutely would have gone viral. Absolutely psychotic. And those were the sorts of things that was probably the extreme of what happened when these things got to got to their peak. Okay. But there was a lot of intensity. And it was kind of interesting, again, because they're club hockey teams.
Right.
And eventually the interest waned.
Right.
And eventually Golombieski was unceremoniously kicked out of the program.
How come?
And it was run over. Well, he was nobody in the university liked him. He was domineering,
right?
And
especially in a non-revenue sport.
And I think behind the scenes, a lot of the players got kind of tired of his antics too. He was very polarizing. There were players who dealt with it and put up with it, and there were players that finally it ran its course. It was one of those things that just sort of ran its course. But at its peak, that program was remarkable. Was one of those things where maybe every city has something that doesn't make sense as to why it's popular.
Right.
For whatever reason, the Ice Cats were that thing here.
Right.
And it didn't last long. It was maybe at most 10 years.
Right.
Could have been realistically closer to 6.
Right.
But in its heyday, the Ice Cats were a big deal as a club hockey team in Tucson.
You know what else is a big deal, John Schuster?
What?
The BetOnline Sportsbook. Now, you can't bet on Ice Cats hockey, but maybe you can. And that's called a tease to go check out the BetOnline Sportsbook. That's where it is. That's everything that's going on right now. John Schuster and I both think this is going to be a sweep in the.
I think the Suns are going to win in 5. But if host Mike Luke believes that this is going to be a sweep and says that I think it's going to be a sweep as well, who am I to say?
Well,
otherwise?
Let's be honest. What we're doing right here, we've essentially assured that the Mavericks will win in brutal fashion in 6 right here. We'll take a quick break. All right, welcome back. John Schuster is heading off, or John Schuster, by the time you listen to this, will be heading off to the to a cooler climate than we are in right now. John Schuster, very much appreciate your time.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, you've been listening.